shooting an indie film, like a fast-paced indie film, is essentially like being one of those like adventurers in like a jungle filled with animals that want to kill you, basically. Like, you just gotta stay alert, because like they're all just waiting out there, and you have to like, they all want to kill you, basically, and you have to like, there's all these like uncertainties and things that are out there. And I feel like my biggest mistakes were the moments when I was like, yeah, oh man. I mean, of course, in the most fun way I say that, like, it's a fun adventure.
My name is Austin Peters, and I am a director and a writer, and I am the director and co-writer of the movie Skincare.
I'm Chris Ripley, DP. Definitely love working with this guy. We first worked together on a couple music videos like 6 years ago, and now we work together on this, which is fun.
The film is called Skincare, and it is about a facialist in Hollywood in 2013 who is on the precipice of launching her own skincare line and sort of taking her career to the next level when a competing esthetician moves in across the way at the complex where she works, and how that causes her to spin out while simultaneously she is beginning to think that someone is out there trying to sabotage her. This project was brought to me by the writers Deering Regan and Sam Freilich, and they brought me the script that they had been working on and off for maybe 2 years, and I was looking for a feature project to direct, and they very generously offered the script to me to consider, and I read it, and from the moment that I finished it and finished the last page, I was totally smitten with it. So immediately the three of us started working on it together, and they continued writing, and then we brought producers on, Jonathan Schwartz and Logan Lerman, and we worked on the script together. And we basically continued working on the script until production. After we had been working on it for quite a bit of time, we gave it to Elizabeth Banks to see if she would consider playing the central part, which was something that we were certain would not come to pass, and we were certain that we were going to get a swift rejection because it just didn't feel like something that someone of her caliber would do, to be on a movie this small with a first-time narrative director when she's such a powerhouse actor, director, writer, producer. We just didn't believe that she would have time to even consider a project like this, but she read it and she really connected with the material, and we set up a Zoom and we talked, and then at that point, it still took quite a bit of time to get the movie to production, but that certainly was the turning point where it started to feel like a real movie rather than this crazy idea that we were trying to talk to people about. Chris and I had worked together before, and he works constantly and is constantly producing amazing work, and though we hadn't seen each other in person probably for a bit of time, I always am keeping up with what he's doing, and I knew that he was wanting to do a movie, so we texted a little bit about it. I said, I'm doing this movie, and, are you interested in doing more movies? And he immediately called me and was like, yes, I am. Give me the script. And we just started talking about it, and we talked about it for such a long time that it just felt like there was no other option really out there that was as strong as Chris, who had such passion for it and material. And then once we sort of got together on it, we just immediately started hanging out basically every single day at my house, talking about it and looking at photos and watching movies and doing page turns through the script and talking about the scene. And
during the period of the film, which is like 2013, there was this kind of weirdly unhinged kind of influx feeling in Hollywood as everything was kind of migrating to social media personalities taking control instead of typical celebrities and all these other things. I am a transplant from Chicago, but I had kind of lived through very early on after I moved to LA in 2011, and something I felt and moved honestly to LA with a couple of YouTubers. That was kind of my first couple jobs were shooting like YouTube videos and stuff. And so being on the inside of that strange period of flux and crazed energy in Hollywood, it was something I instantly was really drawn to, and it was something that surrounded the story of the film, and so we instantly bonded on that. And then just there's like a nice long period where, especially when the film pushed, where we just hung out, and I was really happy to have this period of kind of unstructured prep where we could just geek out over movies or be like, this is cool, and then after a while we're like, well, this has nothing to do with our movie, but we both like it. That was fun.
That was something that I think was so yeah, so crucial to our process was just this time that we got to spend before thinking about everything in the loftiest, most theoretical ways. Even if so much of that is disregarded, you sort of use those moments to like get you further down the line, and just having that time to work through all the ideas, good and bad, before we were actually in hard prep, where basically you're told that nothing you want to do is possible, was really, really helpful. I had sort of a master list of films that were influential on the look, or not the look, but on the film, and they were all sort of influential in different ways. Some were tonal references, some were visual references, some were like spiritual references, and so I was sort of embarrassed to share that with crew members initially, because everyone is working on this insane schedule for such little money and with so few resources, that the last thing I want to do is give people more homework. But Chris and everybody else, honestly, on the crew were eager to get that list of films to look at and consider and see what they sort of took away from it. And so a lot of the things that we were talking about, Chris by far watched the most of anyone. Visually, there's a Todd Haynes movie called Safe. There's a Bob Fosse movie called Star 80 that we looked at a lot. We, of course, looked at lots of Coen Brothers movies, but that was more of a spiritual and tonal kind of reference. The Gus Van Sant movie To Die For was an enormous reference on the movie, huge reference. The Jonathan Glazer movie Birth, which is very much in the Upper East Side and is all sort of like lacquer and brown and doesn't look like Hollywood at all, but that was still something that we talked about constantly. And Philip Lorca de Corsia's photo book Hustlers was sort of a guiding North Star for sure that we looked at constantly, and everybody involved in the film looked at that, where we looked at that for images. Angelina Vito, the costume designer, looked at that and took ideas from there. Louis Pullman looked at it and took inspiration for his performance in it from this book. And then also just driving around Hollywood and going to weird places and trying to sort of like catch the energy of Hollywood Boulevard and feeling like what it felt like in all these different places, knowing that in 2023 when we were shooting this, it already felt like
it was in a new stage.
Time
completely.
And culture had accelerated so intensely, and it had become so much more cranked than it was in 2013. But there was still a lot to learn by just going out and driving around and hanging out sort of in different places and just sort of looking around and trying to find things that we found
way
compelling.
Before the official location scouting started, we were just always in your car just driving up and down Santa Monica and like Sunset.
We went through a number of line producers that sort of told us that it was impossible to make in Los Angeles and that we had to go somewhere else, to Arizona or even further, to Serbia or something. And we really didn't want to do that because we really believed that we were going to get something. Some of the other movies that we talked a lot about are, the sort of 1970s American movies, many of which are in New York and a few that are in LA, and the way that they sort of had this incredible sense of place and realism. And so we wanted it to feel really real, and it felt like, sure, we could go build a soundstage in another country, or we could find interiors in another state and shoot there and then tie it together with cutting
2 days
and,
of B-roll in LA or something.
Yeah, but it just didn't feel, we just were really reluctant to do that, and we were super committed to figuring out a way that we could shoot this movie not only in Los Angeles on location, but also in Hollywood, which was especially brazen because it feels like, we looked at places in Simi Valley that were much more useful, and I love Simi Valley, but it doesn't feel like this movie. And so we really went out of our way to sort of find a location that could practically work for us in Hollywood. And that presented a whole new set of challenges, but it was something that we really believed would be to the ultimate benefit of the film.
We were shooting in Hollywood, and like just outside the set, like people were like fighting, and like there was like a show at the Hollywood Bowl, and like music was like wafting down into the set and making it impossible to record sound, and we were just like, oh, we did this to ourselves. Yeah. Okay, this is the energy that like it needs. Okay, keep going. Obviously, like Angelina Vito, our costume designer, did an incredible job researching the era of costumes. Our makeup department did an incredible job researching makeup from the era. And then Liz Tunkel, our production designer, and I were really kind of researching style and interior design. I mean, she was primarily, but then when it came to the practical lighting, there were certain things where like now LA is so much just white LEDs everywhere. But back then there were still sodium vapor discharge lamps, there were metal halide, and some even old mercury vapor lamps. And so I worked with my gaffer, Matias Peralta, to build custom fixtures that could be in the frame and flare out in beautiful colors on Atlas silvers, but could be in the frame so we could shoot 360 and would look period accurate, would light things in a way that was period accurate. The lights actually are kind of missing crucial wavelengths, so when they land on skin, it kind of has this like dead tone to it that you can kind of emulate by blasting modern LED lights and tinting it that color, but it's not the same. And within our two central locations, the two skincare studios, we did a lot of research to try to think about what's period accurate. Angels is supposed to be this kind of intimidatingly new, fresh thing at the time in 2013. So it was like color, neon, like LED lighting, stuff that now feels a bit passé, but back then was so aggressive and intimidating and sort of cool. Hope's studio was kind of already a bit tired, both because she kind of feels that way and, as is established early on in the film, she's behind on rent. She's sort of sacrificed so much of her money to like build this product. She hasn't had the resources to kind of update her place, to renovate her place. So it actually had to feel more like 2007. So we did a bunch of research there, most of the lighting in there, even though it would be way easier to go down the street and get like LED strips that's available everywhere. I had to like scrounge around and find like halogen puck lights and get our rigging gaffer to like wire them all up in her mirrored shelves. And we sort of set up a whole kind of track lighting style lighting thing where it's more of these kind of spots of things that, again, in 2013 might be a little bit passé, but were cool in 2007, rather than just like, oh, just put a big soft light up there and it'll just be good. It was really about like, how do we make the lighting able to be seen in the frame and always have the period appropriate character and also sort of the correct storytelling character, no matter where the camera is pointed. Oh, of course, Alan Clark, Made in Britain. That was a huge film reference with like Steadicam and stuff.
Yeah.
But it was art. We were like Made in Britain, but anamorphic Made in Britain. Like it's like a totally different kind of spin on it with the camera stuck to people's faces, tracking them.
We looked at all these references from Alan Clark, especially Made in Britain, but also The Firm and Christine, I think, is the other one. And he made all these, he's this English filmmaker, made all these BBC movies, and with the advent of Steadicam, he just became obsessed with it. And it was all about tracking with these characters and entering their world, and oftentimes they were very challenging, problematic characters that you wouldn't necessarily want to spend time with, but in
you're
the film,
forced to like,
it felt like an interesting juxtaposition to sort of bring that approach to this world of beauty and glamour, and sort of revealing the sort of cracks in that facade and her life and of the other characters. Chris was talking about lighting everything 360, and at some point early on in the process, I had decided that that's what we needed to do, that we needed to shoot light everything as much as possible, being that the movie is so performance driven and it's so much about what the actors do and what we discover when we're working with them. I never wanted to constrict them to where they had to be, you know? And so we always wanted that flexibility of just jumping the line or doing whatever needs to happen if that's what felt correct for the performance in that time. That was this whole added challenge of trying to light everything, which 360, which we did a lot of the time. And, you know, Chris and I just went with our co-producer, Tanner Moss. We would go on the weekends and we would go to, once we got the keys to the location, we would go and we would walk through every scene, and I would sort of block it, and we would photo board it with the three of us, and then we would turn those into actual storyboards.
My phone had thousands of frames of Austin and Tanner just like
playing the scenes. Yeah,
playing the scenes out.
I would love to know numerically like how often we ended up doing that.
Yeah.
You know, because we spent all this time planning those things, but it was always just knowing that when we got there, that something better, very well.
We had incredible
likely.
actors. We had to be malleable, and an incredible camera operator too, who was great at, he just was seasoned with narrative and was great at finding, sometimes it's like, wait, this solves a lot of problems. I will say also George was very good to me when I could not light 360.
Right.
He could always kind of thread the needle around whatever I
hiding
had
the
put
spot.
in the way. Yeah, and he was very good about that. He saved my butt a number of times when I was like, sorry, he's like, I got you.
Yeah.
Yeah. we shot on Alexa 35, and we did a lot of tests. We actually shot a fair amount of film tests, and we'll get into it later. But Atlas was generous enough to let us come actually to the parking lot and shoot some film tests with my 235 35 camera and an Alexa 35, comparing how each format rendered the images with the same 50mm Atlas Orion lens on each camera. So with matched lenses, our incredible colorist, Dante Pasquinelli, he was able to build us a LUT and kind of an overall color transform that was like fairly close to how the 35 rendered images on Alexa 35. So that was like a great foundation already. We then brought my little SL Cine 35 camera on set, and we would throw Atlas lenses on it and shoot once a day or so, one or two of the setups, just to have reference points. So there were all these reference points for how the movie would look on film if we had been so lucky as to shoot on film, and then we could kind of have a target for our color grading with the Alexa 35 footage. And we entertained for a while the idea of like, is there any way to maybe just shoot the daytime stuff on 35 or this or that? But then it's like, once you have two formats, we were like, even if we were somehow magically able to like rustle up the money for like to shoot like 20% of the movie on 35 or something for day exteriors, having two formats and all like that, in 18 days, it's like if a film camera jams once for 10 minutes, that's already like, that's I mean, we were budgeted for 5.5 hours of overtime over 18 days, and we hit 6.5. Mainly thanks to Austin and our incredible first AD, Paul Silver, but like, in other words, we slipped an hour over 18 days, which is crazy, and that's like about as much as we could afford to slip. So 10 minutes is a sixth of that, you know, like, so we were just like, there's no way to do it as much as I love shooting on film.
And then in the post process with Dante and the coloring process, we did a series of film out tests doing printing digital to 35, and those we did it I think 3 different ways, and those would sort of come back with very different results that were sometimes very chaotic and sometimes very interesting, and sometimes they would be too rough or whatever. But then we were sort of able to pick and choose kind of, I think, our favorite things that happened to kind of create this hybrid image that emulated film in the way that we wanted to, and was able to achieve the look of the movie that we had been working towards.
Without being like too over the top and aggressive of like a film emulation.
Yeah, exactly. Without being nostalgic. You
Yeah.
know? And because we didn't want it to feel nostalgic, and we didn't want it to feel vintage, like a print that you had dug up out of the dirt, like from the 60s or something, which is amazing. I love when movies look like that.
It's incredible.
You know, that's an incredible
not this
look,
movie.
but it didn't feel appropriate for this. So we wanted to really make something that felt contemporary, but also had all the qualities that we loved of 4-perf 35mm. Part of what makes working with Chris and working with Dante such a privilege is that when you have 18 days with the cast, like, they're all doing other shit. They're all in other shows, and our schedule was like a humongous Jenga tower that was like gonna fall at any minute, trying to like work out when we could have Louis Pullman, or when we could have Michaela J. Rodriguez, or when Luis Gerardo Mendez could be there. Elizabeth obviously worked every single day. You know, the thing that we really didn't have in addition to money is that we didn't have time. We didn't have time to sacrifice because Chris and I were chasing some image that we weren't certain about, you know? And we had to really make sure that we got as much time with the actors as possible. We knew that that's what would benefit the final film. But like I said, one of the privileges of working with Chris and Dante is that where we do have time is before and after. And so on both those times, we were able to make this elaborate, overcomplicated plan before we shot. Also, on the second half of it, when we were in color after we were picture locked, then we just ran so many experiments, which we didn't technically have time for, but we were committed to doing them anyway.
I was gonna say too that we didn't shoot film because it would have eaten up too much time. We were advised by some kind of different old school people that anamorphic lenses would also steal time from us, and we did a lot of testing with different anamorphics, and I sort of found not to jump to it, but I found in our testing, we went through multiple phases of testing at different camera houses and I have a lot of footage also of you wandering around on different anamorphic lenses, and we found that like Atlas lenses, beyond the attributes where we really liked them visually in the tests, they had great close focus, sort of minimal distortion that would get in the way of stuff. They were lightweight. Lots of things that you normally expect with prime lenses. And so sort of some older school people would be like, oh, it's gonna kill you in these small locations, moving so fast. Anamorphic is like, it's just you're putting a nail in your coffin. And we fought for it. And my argument always was like, listen, these are a modern breed of anamorphic lenses that still have these kind of beautiful characteristics and like softness and sort of interesting, of course, like bokeh and everything else, and just character sort of different from center to edge in the frame of older anamorphic lenses. But the construction and the ergonomics and the mechanics of these lenses are so good that we're going to be able to fly on these. And sure enough, they moved super fast. No one had a problem ever, even when we were under the gun in the craziest ways. We just ripped super fast and the lenses were great. So
yeah. Chris and I have talked about many times about how when we were looking at the edits or doing screenings, that there was never a single time that I looked at any of the imagery and thought, oh, maybe we should have used
shot
one.
Spherical.
Yeah. There was never a single moment.
Same here.
It was always from the second the footage came back, him and I were both just immediately knew. We were like, oh, that's what it's supposed to look like. That's what this movie's supposed to look like. Something that we talked about a lot in the color process and beforehand is that the image couldn't feel stepped on. Like, even though this was a period piece, and I love to step on an image. Like, and I love, a degraded image and lower res formats and all that. But it just felt like for this story and this world, it didn't feel right. It wasn't the kind of movie we were making. We didn't want to remove that, create a barrier between the audience and the character, and so we were always trying to figure out how can we make it feel cinematic and how can we make it feel filmic without stepping on the image and without while adhering to our insane demands and logistics and production schedule, by also not delivering like the quality of image that we wanted to. And I think that being able to shoot on these lenses, which Chris and I basically decided we were going to do before we told anybody, and then when we told everyone that we were going to do it, they were sort of shocked that we had decided to shoot anamorphic. But to the credit of our crew, who is wonderful, they immediately sort of were like, if you guys want, we can do it. But it just brought such a cinematic look to the whole film, and when you're shooting in real locations that you've not shut down, stores that you haven't closed, and like places that you can't control and places that you have to shoot out in 45 minutes before you're going to get kicked out, I think that those lenses really helped get us closer to where we wanted to be and saved us time in that way.
I was going to say too that the Atlas lenses, there's a great way that they sort of imbued the image with character, but unlike some really kind of crazy anamorphic lenses, it wasn't stepped on, it wasn't overly stylized. It was just the right amount of character. And in the same reason we wanted to shoot film and ultimately emulated film was sort of the reason we wanted lenses with like not super clean anamorphic, but like a little bit of character, is we wanted character within the fabric of the image, because I feel like there's a tendency when you don't have a lot of money to either just go super clean and straight and then it kind of looks like generic TV, or to go ultra stylized in the lighting and the color grade and just way over the top kind of music video. And it was like, if we could find a way for this film to, at its foundation, in its fabric, feel like slightly elevated in a subtle way, then so much heavy lifting is done, and then we don't have to have overwrought lighting, overwrought color grade to kind of bring style to the film. Then we can kind of have a gentle touch everywhere downstream, and it'll still feel like a movie and feel like something really special and unique that you're excited to watch. So that was sort of the thing. We shot on Atlas Orions, and then we also had a set of silvers. The movie goes off the rails a bit as it continues on, and as that's occurring, we had more and more reason for, during certain nighttime scenes primarily, the silvers would kind of creep in. and start to flare out. They have that really interesting tendency to flare light sources in the color of the light source instead of like blue or something like that. The light sources of this kind of lurid Hollywood would start to flare out, and the image would start to kind of like get more and more torqued. We still use them fairly sparingly because it's easy for it to just get out of control, but like at the right moments, it was great because we carried a set of Atlas Silvers the entire show. So sometimes we'd be like, let's try, whoa, okay, no, back to the Orions. But other times we were like, yes, okay, amazing. So it was really nice to have, again, that speaks to how fast the lenses are, that we, even on this 18-day shoot when we had no time to do anything, sometimes would have the chance to swing a lens and be like, let's try and see if it works here. Wow, yeah, it does. Let's do it. Or let's swing again and go to the Orion. Anamorphic has like a great history in Hollywood cinema. When it was created, of course, it's like the most grand films, the really big, special Hollywood films would be anamorphic. And so there's this kind of old school glamour to the format. And I was really interested in taking this glamorous format and then starting to erode it as you sort of go into these darker corners of Hollywood, as you start to see the grit, some of these sodium vapor lights and things like that kind of mess with skin tone, and start to see this grunge, having this format start to kind of get pulled apart and eroded and start to disintegrate in front of our eyes. I think there's something really interesting there, and it rhymes a lot with sort of the process of our main character in the film, the arc of our main character in the film.
Obviously, the whole movie, especially the first 2/3 of it, are really attached to Elizabeth Banks' character, and the film is timed to her breathing, and you're meant to really feel super close to her. And so, as the narrative is sort of her sort of becoming unhinged and disconnecting from reality in so many ways, it allowed us a lot of ways to visually express that without being over the top, and being able to intercut shots that we did on the Silvers, and being able to just use those to tell that story in a way that was gentle but still effective, and I think that was really something we were really excited about. Also, knowing that this character is someone who's so centrally focused on herself and is very unaware of what other people are going through. We always talked about, well, what's the way that we express that visually? Is it, do we shoot the movie 4:3? How do we do this? And I think that shooting Anamorphic gave us the ability to be in conversation with this old Hollywood glamour and these really premium images, while also still putting us super close to her.
And even like the fact that like anamorphic lenses sort of have different attributes as you move from the center to the edge of the image field. And so when you are doing the Alan Clark image tracking and she's dead center, you're so with her, and then everything else kind of falls off in an interesting way. The two studios were very, very small too. And so lighting 360, I think it was beyond the stuff that was fun period stuff. We custom built these ring lights that we put up in the ceiling so that we could kind of have a little bailout ambience, but it came from a giant ring, so it has more kind of shape to it and kind of a chord out center, so it's not as sourcey, and that stuff was really helpful. That was actually a really interesting process, because I think the first day or two there we were like, it's so tiny, there's mirrors everywhere, like, and then like we like locked into our stride and we were like, we love this place, like we have it, like we can figure it out. And that was a really good moment when we felt like we were like, okay, our main location that we orbit the whole film around, we can like figure it out. As you were saying, like, we're not trying to go to Simi Valley, even though there were some great logistically friendly solutions there. We wanted to feel Hollywood, and we also wanted to feel that these places really were oriented opposite each other, right next to each other. And so it was essential to build out these sets, which Liz did fantastically, in these two real kind of tiny, realistic places that couldn't have wild walls or anything else, or a grid ceiling. I mean, we kind of built our own grid into the ceiling. But yeah, the fact that we were in these two places, what's funny is the sun almost never went directly into them, which was kind of nice because we would control it. But then we had this film gear power beam that kind of became our sun that we could sneak in and kind of smash light into each of the two studios and land it wherever it needed to go to kind of bounce off a wall, and then it would become, in a place that was totally appropriate for 360 lighting, it would become like a nice soft light source, but the light source was just a patch of sun on the wall, so it could be photographed in camera and wouldn't be a problem.
Something that was sort of a creative challenge on this film is how do you tell a story about these characters that is going to be visually compelling and look good to me, like in a way when these characters and I don't share the same aesthetic at all. These sort of 2013 beauty world aesthetics are not old enough to be nostalgic. You know, how do we create something that when someone is flipping through the channel, you know, and it's on television, that you're not confused into thinking it's something else. We're looking at Real Housewives of Beverly Hills, you know, season 4 in 2013 and looking at costumes, but you don't want it to look like that. You don't want anybody to confuse it with that. You want it to feel like you can see in one frame that what kind of movie it is, and you know, you can feel the tone of it even if you don't necessarily know what it is. And so that was a big challenge throughout, and I think that the lenses, part of that was really helpful because we could utilize them to put us more in her head and have those nice sort of qualities that Chris was describing, and the lighting and making the lighting work in such a way where Chris built a giant custom ring light that was the chandelier in her studio, you know, and so we were able to achieve what we did in large part because we had the right tools, and that was, you know, these Atlas lenses.
Yeah, and just foundationally, as a day goes by on an 18-day shoot, not everything happens as planned, but if kind of foundationally the tools you have, even as you pivot, as you stumble, as things happen, the image kind of renders correctly in the way that you initially, like I always sort of talk about prep in a movie is like your smart self, setting all these things up and kind of distilling all these complex, like film theory and this reference and this movie and all these things you could talk about for hours. You gotta distill it into like simple rules for your like dumb, exhausted self to like understand when you're on like day 15 and everything's going wrong. Your dumb self is like blue. It just has to be blue. I don't remember why, but that's like the dumb rule I gave to myself after you like talked about like Kozlowski or something for like 20 years like before then. In that way, it was like we set ourselves up with anamorphic lenses, and then even in the chaos, things rendered out the way we wanted them to because of that. This is such a cop-out, but I'm proud of Austin for setting up a set that like was really, even though it was the crazy jungle we were like slashing our way through, it was a joy every day. Everybody had so much fun. The friends and family screening, like so many people pulled up and like had an amazing time, and we're like, wow, the film really came out. Like just the atmosphere front to back. You have to surround yourself with people that you like get along with, even when things are like really on the rocks. And Austin set it up that way and inspired that feeling every day. This is our lives as filmmakers, is set after set. And I think one thing we can be proud of is when we do a set that everyone has a great time, because that's our lives, is doing these things. So we might as well all have a great time together.
Yeah, I think that I sort of echo that sentiment, and I'm the most proud of. The thing that I'm the most proud of is everybody on this movie, from the cast, obviously, who are so incredible, and I'm so proud to have played a part, however small, in their amazing performances that they give in this movie. And I think I'm so proud of the team behind the camera, from production through all the way through post, you know, and finishing. Just, it's a really an incredible honor and life-affirming experience to get to work with artists of such high caliber, whether it's Chris or Elizabeth Banks or
Fatima, who did the score.
Yeah, Fatima, who did the score,
artist.
is
Yeah.
incredible, and Laura Zempel, who's the editor, and Liz Tunkel, the production designer, and George, our camera operator, and Angelina, the costume designer, and Mel and Cheryl and the hair and makeup team. It's just like everyone was doing such amazing work that it inspires everybody to be better. And when the final film comes out and you're finally disconnected from changes that you can make and you can't touch it anymore, you get to sit back and admire all this incredible work that everybody did that you knew they were doing and you were appreciative of the whole time, but then getting to step back and see and really like witness it and really just watch, just only looking at the makeup or only listening to the sound design has been such a fun part of this experience.